The day that Brightwell Enterprises collapsed began with a simple misunderstanding. Jessica Carter, the billionaire CEO of Carter Tech, a leading tech corporation in the industry, entered the Brightwell building lobby with an understated yet elegant demeanor, no showy display, and no entourage. The receptionist, Ashley Monroe, took one glance at Jessica's dark skin and her sophisticated, modest attire, and immediately concluded that she didn't belong there. "Deliveries go around the back," Ashley sneered, signaling for the security guards to quickly grab Jessica by the arm. Nearby, Mark Reynolds, the executive vice president, instantly recognized Jessica but chose to remain silent, letting the humiliation unfold. As Jessica was escorted out of the building, her expression remained calm, showing no emotion. Yet, in her mind, a sharp plan of retaliation was already taking shape. By the afternoon, Brightwell's stock began plummeting uncontrollably. By the end of the month, the company was completely wiped off the market. The early morning sunlight streamed through the transparent glass of the Brightwell Enterprises building, reflecting off the glossy marble walls like a statement of the corporation's power and success. Across the street, Jessica Carter, the powerful and mysterious black billionaire of Carter Tech, watched quietly. To her, no business strategy was more important than understanding how potential partners would treat ordinary people when they didn't know they were being judged. Jessica gently adjusted the sleeve of her charcoal cashmere sweater, a simple yet luxurious design that clearly displayed her refined aesthetic. She wore no flashy jewelry or overt brand symbols, but anyone with a keen eye would immediately understand that this was a woman of wealth, power, and confidence. Walking through the busy street, Jessica blended into the crowd and entered the main lobby of Brightwell. Immediately, she felt the curious, scrutinizing gazes upon her. She noticed the stark contrast in how people were treated. A white man in an expensive suit who entered just before her was immediately greeted warmly by the receptionist. Jessica, though equally well-dressed, was met only with hesitant glances. Trying to maintain her composure, Jessica slowly approached the reception desk. There, Ashley Monroe, the blonde with cold blue eyes, was engrossed in her phone, oblivious to the guests standing before her. Jessica patiently waited a few seconds before speaking, her voice gentle but powerful. "Good morning. I have an appointment with Mr. Richard Lawson at 9 a.m. Could you please check for me?" Ashley slowly lifted her eyes, scanning Jessica from head to toe with a look of undisguised disdain. Before her stood a black woman, dressed modestly, entirely unlike someone who would meet the CEO of Brightwell. With a sigh, Ashley coldly replied, "Name?" "Jessica Carter," Jessica answered, her voice still calm but firm. Ashley immediately sneered in mockery, muttering just loud enough for Jessica to hear, "The delivery entrance is at the back. People like you are using the wrong door." Jessica was momentarily taken aback by the blatant racism in Ashley's attitude. Though she had encountered such behavior many times before, it always left an indescribable sting. Suppressing her emotions, Jessica persisted. "I'm not here for deliveries. I have an appointment with Richard Lawson regarding a crucial partnership deal between Brightwell and Carter Tech. Please check the schedule for me." Ashley snorted, pretending to type on the computer keyboard but actually not checking anything at all. Then she looked up, mocking her response. "There's no appointment under the name Jessica Carter. Perhaps you've got the wrong address or are just trying to cause trouble. Please leave immediately." Jessica frowned slightly, her gaze sharpening, but she maintained her polite demeanor. "I think you should check the meeting schedule again. This appointment is very important." Before she could finish, Ashley raised her hand, grabbing Jessica's sweater sleeve and sharply commanding, "I told you, you don't have an appointment. Leave right now or I'll call security." Jessica looked down at Ashley's hand, clutching her luxurious cashmere sleeve. then slowly looked up into the receptionist's cold blue eyes. Her voice, still gentle, carried a commanding authority that made Ashley hesitate. "Remove your hand from me." Ashley flinched, releasing her grip, but immediately screamed for security. "Security! There's a troublemaker!" In an instant, the lobby erupted in chaos. Two large security guards quickly moved in, unhesitatingly grabbing Jessica's arms and pushing her toward the exit. Jessica didn't resist. She stood tall, her gaze filled with pride and restraint, staring straight ahead. From the executive elevator, Executive Vice President Mark Reynolds stepped out. Upon seeing Jessica, Mark was momentarily startled. Instantly recognizing the woman being treated like a troublemaker was none other than Jessica Carter, the powerful CEO Brightwell had been trying to partner with. But instead of intervening, Mark simply smirked, standing silently as Jessica was humiliated and pushed out of the building. Up on the mezzanine level, Vanessa Lewis, the rare black manager at Brightwell, gripped the railing, her face twisted in pain, eyes burning with rage. She recognized Jessica immediately. Vanessa wanted to scream, to run down and stop the scene, but her legs felt frozen to the ground. She knew all too well that speaking up would end her career. Vanessa could only watch, heart heavy with guilt, as Jessica was shoved out of the door. Walking outside, amid the disdainful glances, Jessica Carter paused for a moment on the sidewalk. Her cold gaze passed over the large Brightwell logo on the towering building. A brief smile, cold and decisive, flickered across her lips. Jessica took her phone from her pocket, pressed a single button, and spoke calmly but with terrifying composure into the receiver. "Execute Plan B. Cancel the entire deal with Brightwell immediately." Jessica walked away slowly, each step carrying a promise of power and determination. Brightwell Enterprises had no idea that from this fateful moment the seismic shock of its downfall had begun. As Jessica's figure faded behind the glass door, Ashley Monroe returned to her seat, a smug smile spreading across her face. She lightly stroked her expensive designer blazer, rewarding herself with a sip of freshly brewed latte, then whispered to her colleague beside her in a distinctly mocking tone. "People like that always think they're important. It's a shame they never realize their place." Her young colleague chuckled lightly in agreement, but his eyes betrayed a sense of awkwardness. Ashley didn't care. To her, power didn't just lie in the hands of the big bosses. Even a receptionist like her had the authority to decide who deserved to be in Brightwell and who didn't. Not far down the hall, Mark Reynolds stood silently. His cold eyes remained fixed on the main door where Jessica had just been pushed out. In that moment, Mark had recognized the face. Jessica Carter, the mysterious and powerful CEO of Carter Tech. But instead of intervening to stop the scene, Mark purposely stayed quiet, arms crossed, watching. In his mind, a cunning plan was already taking shape. Months before, Mark Reynolds had been unhappy with CEO Richard Lawson's decision to partner with Carter Tech. A staunch believer in traditional relationships, Mark was uncomfortable with the idea of relying on a company led by a black woman, especially since it might threaten his position of power within Brightwell. And now, when Jessica Carter appeared here, misunderstood and humiliated right before him, Mark saw the perfect opportunity to sabotage the deal without directly intervening himself. "Ashley," Mark slowly approached the reception desk, his voice calm but with an underlying hint of scheming interest. "What happened just now?" Ashley was startled to see the executive vice president standing next to her, quickly rising from her seat. Her tone immediately softened. "Oh, just a woman who was pretending to have an appointment with Mr. Lawson, Mr. Reynolds. It was nothing. I handled it." Mark raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. Are you sure she wasn't an important guest? Ashley immediately chuckled softly, her eyes gleaming with overconfidence. Definitely not. I know that type well. If she were really important, she wouldn't have shown up looking like that. Mark nodded in satisfaction, gently patting Ashley on the shoulder, offering encouragement while subtly reinforcing her attitude. Good job, Ashley. Keep up that vigilance. Brightwell needs people like you who know their place. Ashley beamed with pride at the praise from the senior leader, completely unaware that he had subtly exploited her arrogance and deep-seated racial bias to serve his own interests. In Mark Reynolds' eyes, Ashley was just a pawn, easily manipulated to achieve his goals. Further up on the mezzanine level, Vanessa Lewis, the only black manager among the mid-level leadership at Brightwell, remained frozen like a statue, her eyes filled with sorrow and deep frustration. Ashley's words had unintentionally echoed in Vanessa's ears, each syllable cutting through her like a knife to her pride. Vanessa understood all too well. She had endured countless instances of being disrespected and insulted because of her skin color within this very building. But to keep her job, she always had to swallow that anger and hurt. Today, seeing Jessica Carter, a woman she admired, wealthy and powerful, being treated no differently than how Vanessa herself had been treated in the past, Vanessa's heart ached with a pain more unbearable than ever before. "Are you okay?" A soft voice from a young colleague pulled Vanessa from her heavy thoughts. She forced a smile, responding faintly, "I'm fine." But Vanessa knew she was far from okay. Outside the building, Jessica Carter stepped into the luxury car waiting for her. Her assistant, Laura, quickly opened the door. As soon as Jessica was inside, Laura urgently spoke. "We just got a call from Brightwell. They want to confirm your appointment again immediately." Jessica gazed out the window, her deep, unreadable eyes betraying no emotion, then shook her head gently, her voice calm yet cold. "It's too late, Laura. When an organization allows people like Ashley Monroe to represent it, that clearly shows their culture. We don't need any more explanations." The car quietly blended into the bustling traffic of the city, leaving behind the Brightwell Enterprises building, now slowly descending into chaos as it realized the severe consequences of the contempt and prejudice it had just allowed. But now, it was too late to fix anything. A large crack had formed, just waiting for the right moment to spread, shattering everything Brightwell had once been proud of. From the moment Ashley coldly said, "Deliveries go around the back," the fate of Brightwell Enterprises had been sealed. But both Ashley Monroe and Mark Reynolds had yet to realize that the woman they had just disrespected wasn't simply an ordinary client. She was Jessica Carter, powerful and influential enough to make them pay 100-fold for their insult. From the mezzanine, where soft light filtered through the tempered glass, Vanessa Lewis remained still, her hand gripping the railing as if trying to hold herself back from the fury boiling within. Her heart ached with each beat as she witnessed the scene unfolding below in the main lobby, a scene so familiar it nearly took her breath away. Vanessa had once believed that in her role as a mid-level manager at Brightwell, she would be respected, listened to, but the reality was the complete opposite. She often witnessed the disdain shown toward black people here, the cold stares, the prejudiced remarks, and now, right before her eyes, even a powerful woman like Jessica Carter wasn't spared from that ruthless cycle. As Jessica was shoved out the door, she inadvertently looked up, her sharp gaze cutting through Vanessa's trembling eyes. A brief but haunting moment. Vanessa felt her heart stop. In Jessica's eyes there was no anger, no despair, just an unnervingly calm demeanor, cold, mysterious, and full of authority. That look only made Vanessa feel more conflicted. Why did a powerful, wealthy woman like Jessica have to endure this? "Are you okay, Vanessa?" A voice from behind pulled Vanessa from her heavy thoughts. She turned around to see the worried eyes of Sophia, a young intern who had only been working there for a few months. "What's wrong, Sophia?" Vanessa tried to steady her voice. "I just heard that the person Ashley kicked out was Jessica Carter, the CEO of Carter Tech. This is going to be huge." Sophia lowered her voice, glancing around cautiously. Vanessa felt a cold shiver run down her spine. What she had feared most had come to pass. Brightwell Enterprises hadn't just insulted an ordinary woman. They had openly disrespected one of the most influential figures in the tech industry today. Vanessa took a deep breath, trying to suppress the rising anger in her chest. "Who told you that?" "The sales department. They just called the higher-ups, I overheard. The whole company is in turmoil now," Sophia replied quietly, her eyes full of confusion. Vanessa knew exactly what this meant. She wasn't unfamiliar with the kind of disrespect from people like Ashley Monroe, but she hadn't anticipated it being so openly blatant. She wanted to run down to the lobby, to shout that they were making a grave mistake, but her feet felt like they were nailed to the floor. She understood. Just speaking out once would cause everything she had worked for to vanish in an instant. "Are you okay?" Sophia asked with concern, noticing how long Vanessa had remained silent. "I'm fine. Just go back to your desk." Vanessa forced out a reassuring smile. As Sophia walked away, Vanessa glanced once more down into the lobby. Ashley was still chatting and laughing, completely unaware of the dire consequences of what she had just done. Mark Reynolds, the powerful man with the calculating, cold expression, was casually stepping into the elevator, unfazed. To Mark, what had just happened was no more than a power game, with Jessica Carter simply a pawn he had inadvertently used to achieve his personal goals. Vanessa realized the painful truth. Brightwell Enterprises didn't only have Ashley Monroe harboring deep prejudice. Mark Reynolds, and even many other powerful individuals, secretly encouraged that very attitude. They were just much better at hiding it than Ashley. Vanessa closed her eyes, her anger and despair mixing, making her head throb as if struck by a hammer. It was here, in this very place, where she had once believed she could change the toxic culture that existed. But now she understood her own helplessness. If someone as powerful as Jessica Carter, someone who had the strength to change the tech industry, couldn't escape this humiliation, what could she possibly do? Vanessa took a deep breath, brushing away a tear that had escaped. She promised herself that one day she wouldn't have to stand in silence and witness things like this anymore. But for today, she could do nothing but stand there, watching Jessica Carter's figure fade away. Jessica's luxury car quietly pulled away, leaving behind the towering Brightwell Enterprises building. But Jessica knew exactly what would happen next. Not through reckless revenge, but with cold, calculated composure. And inside Brightwell, Vanessa Lewis also understood clearly that people like Ashley Monroe and Mark Reynolds would soon face the devastating consequences of the contempt and prejudice they had sown. For now, though, Vanessa could only stand there in helplessness, feeling the pain and anger swell inside her heart, waiting for the day when justice would be served. But when that day arrived, who would stand up to bear witness to all the injustices of today? And would Vanessa herself have the courage to become one of those people? The luxury car slowly merged into the flow of traffic, leaving behind the sleek yet cold Brightwell Enterprises building under the bright sunlight. Jessica Carter sat quietly in the back seat, her gaze focused on the outside, seemingly lost in her own private thoughts. Beside her, her assistant Laura waited in silence, well aware that this was not the right moment to interrupt the powerful woman next to her. It wasn't until the car passed through the bustling streets that Jessica gently turned, her sharp eyes returning to a focused and decisive state. "Laura, inform the legal and PR departments immediately. We will withdraw from all negotiations with Brightwell Enterprises. I want this statement to be issued within the next hour." Laura was momentarily taken aback by the intensity in Jessica's voice, but she quickly nodded, carefully noting down the request. "I understand, Miss Carter, but are you sure you want to do this right now?" Jessica offered a faint smile, a subtle yet meaningful one. A company that allows people like Ashley Monroe to represent its face will never be a reliable partner. What happened today isn't just a personal insult. It's a very clear sign of the toxic culture within Brightwell. Laura paused for a moment, immediately realizing that Jessica wasn't just handling a personal issue. This was a strategic decision with long-term goals, one that would send a powerful message to the entire tech industry. "I'll implement it right away," Laura replied softly, her eyes showing a hint of tension but filled with determination. As Laura dialed the PR and legal teams at Carter Tech, Jessica opened her tablet and skimmed through the pre-prepared information on Brightwell. She knew the consequences of this decision would send shockwaves through the tech world, but it was a necessary step. For Jessica, silently enduring was unacceptable, and her silence today was merely the calm before an important battle. Less than 30 minutes later, news of Carter Tech's withdrawal from all partnerships with Brightwell Enterprises quickly spread, shaking the entire tech industry. Major newspapers immediately picked up the story with sensational headlines. Carter Tech abruptly cancels strategic partnership with Brightwell Enterprises, internal issues suspected. At Brightwell, Richard Lawson, the CEO of the corporation, had just entered his office when his phone started vibrating non-stop with dozens of urgent calls and messages from major shareholders and partners. He immediately called an emergency leadership meeting, his voice frantic and tinged with fear. "Can anyone tell me what's going on? Why did Carter Tech pull out so suddenly?" In the luxurious conference room, now tense with uncertainty, Mark Reynolds sat silently at the end of the table. His cold, unperturbed eyes gave no sign of concern, even hinting at a subtle, barely perceptible satisfaction. As Richard's gaze swept over him, Mark casually shrugged, pretending not to know anything. "Strange. I saw Miss Carter this morning in the lobby, but it seems no one could confirm her appointment." Richard was taken aback, snapping at his secretary. "Check immediately. Did Jessica Carter really come here this morning?" "Yes, sir," the secretary stammered. "But it seems the receptionist didn't let her in." The room fell into an oppressive silence. Richard felt his heart stop. Carter Tech was the only strategic partner that could save Brightwell from the silent crisis unfolding, and now that relationship had been completely shattered. "Who is responsible for this?" Richard growled, trying to control his anger. A faint voice came from the corner of the room. It was Receptionist Ashley Monroe, sir. She refused to let Jessica Carter in and called security to have her escorted out. Richard felt as if he had been struck by lightning. He couldn't believe the unprofessionalism and the insulting attitude of an employee could result in such severe consequences. But he also understood that this mistake couldn't have come solely from Ashley. This was undoubtedly a sign of a much deeper issue, the culture of disdain and discrimination that he had unwittingly allowed to fester within Brightwell for far too long. At the end of the table, Mark Reynolds remained calm, his expression completely composed. He had known everything from the beginning, but had intentionally allowed the situation to unfold, aiming to weaken Richard Lawson's position. In reality, Mark had carefully calculated when Carter Tech withdrew, Brightwell would fall into chaos, and he would be the one to benefit directly from this turmoil. Outside the meeting room, Vanessa Lewis overheard the entire conversation with a heavy heart. She knew that from the moment Jessica Carter had left Brightwell in silence, everything had spiraled out of control. That silence was not resignation. It was the beginning of a major battle, where the most severe consequences would be aimed directly at the very people holding power at Brightwell. Vanessa took a deep breath, knowing that the most terrible storm had now begun to form, and Brightwell Enterprises would never be the same again. As for Jessica Carter, the woman who had just left calmly and powerfully, she certainly had a plan to gradually expose the true faces of those who had disrespected and insulted her. A small decision, born of Ashley Monroe's cold demeanor, a calculated silence from Mark Reynolds. But now, Brightwell Enterprises was facing the first horrific consequence, stemming from Jessica Carter's cold but powerful decision. And this was just the beginning. As the door to the conference room swung open, Richard Lawson hurried out into the hallway, his face flushed with anger. He quickly made his way to the main lobby, each step seeming to suppress an impending explosion of rage. The company's lobby had descended into chaos. Employees whispered nervously, their eyes fixed on Richard as he walked toward the reception desk. They all sensed a major storm was about to hit. Ashley Monroe was still chatting with a colleague, completely unaware of what was coming her way. That was until she looked up and met Richard Lawson's cold, steely gaze locked onto her. The smile on her face instantly vanished. "Ashley!" Richard growled, slamming both hands onto the reception desk. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Ashley's face drained of color as she nervously stood up. "Mr. Lawson, I don't understand." Richard cut her off, his voice sharp with fury. "Don't understand. The woman you just rudely kicked out is Jessica Carter, CEO of Carter Tech. She holds the very future of Brightwell in her hands." Richard's words rang out clearly, silencing the entire lobby in an instant. Every eye was on Ashley, and she felt as though 1,000 daggers were aimed directly at her. Her once confident, haughty expression now appeared pale, almost devoid of life. I didn't know. No one informed me." Ashley stammered, her voice barely audible, filled with fear. Richard gritted his teeth, his eyes full of disappointment and anger. "No one informed you? Is that why you treated a guest like that? A powerful CEO walks into our building, and you couldn't even be bothered to check her appointment." Ashley had no words to defend herself now. She had fully realized the terrible consequences of her arrogance and prejudice, but it was all too late. Across the room, Mark Reynolds stood leaning against the wall, arms crossed, calmly observing the entire scene with a composed expression. But in his cold, calculating eyes, a flicker of satisfaction was barely noticeable. In just a few short minutes, he had achieved his first goal, humiliating Richard Lawson and having Carter Tech withdraw from the deal, a deal he had never wanted to happen. "I told you from day one that the receptionist is the face of Brightwell," Richard continued, his voice trembling with rage. "And today, that face has destroyed everything we've built." Ashley was completely silent now, her legs trembling as though she might collapse. Her eyes unconsciously flicked toward Mark Reynolds, seeking some form of help. But Mark only returned her gaze with cold indifference before turning his face away. At that moment, Ashley understood she was just a small pawn, used and discarded. Richard took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure, then turned to address the employees who had been witnessing the scene in shock. "Everyone, listen closely. Brightwell is facing an unprecedented crisis. Carter Tech just announced they are terminating all partnerships with us because of this unforgivable mistake. I will no longer tolerate the irresponsible attitude and disregard for others here." His voice grew deep and resolute. "Ashley Monroe, you're fired. Pack up your belongings and leave within the next 30 minutes. I don't want to see you again." Ashley burst into tears right there, her face drowning in shame and despair. The colleagues who had previously been chatting and laughing with her now averted their gazes, none daring to approach and offer comfort. Vanessa Lewis stood not far away, her heart conflicted. Though she felt some satisfaction at seeing the consequences of disdain and discrimination unfold, she knew that Ashley was merely a small manifestation of a much larger toxic culture at Brightwell. The real danger, someone like Mark Reynolds, remained untouched, silently manipulating everything from the shadows. Vanessa looked up and caught the cold, mysterious gaze of Mark as he watched Richard. She shuddered, understanding that the internal battle at Brightwell had only just begun. Outside the building, Jessica Carter had already received news of the chaos unfolding inside Brightwell. She skimmed through the message that Laura had sent, her face as calm and unreadable as ever. Jessica knew that this first consequence was just the beginning of a chain reaction that would make Brightwell Enterprises pay dearly. Jessica pressed the button to send the next notification to her legal team. "Prepare all documents related to the lawsuit for discrimination and defamation. We will bring this to light in the clearest way possible." She leaned back in her seat, her eyes still fixed straight ahead, calm but resolute. Her decision wasn't driven by personal hatred, but by the responsibility to confront and eradicate the toxic culture that thrived in this business world. Brightwell Enterprises had just felt its first tremor, but Jessica Carter knew this was just the first ripple of a much larger earthquake that she had carefully prepared for. And now, the real battle had only just begun. Just hours after Richard Lawson's furious interrogation in the lobby, news of the incident at Brightwell Enterprises spread like wildfire across social media and the news outlets. Videos captured by security cameras and employees' phones were quickly posted, clear in every detail, exposing the entire event in an undeniable way. In no time, Ashley Monroe's cold, dismissive attitude toward Jessica Carter became the center of public attention. Furious comments flooded in, criticizing Brightwell Enterprises and particularly condemning Ashley with the harshest language. Brightwell's stock immediately plummeted on the stock market. Investors panicked, selling off their shares at an unprecedented rate. In just a few hours, Brightwell's market value dropped by hundreds of millions of dollars, sending the company's leadership into a state of fear and helplessness. Up in the HR office, Ashley Monroe sat motionless on the cold, hard chair. In front of her stood Janet Collins, the head of HR, with a face as cold as ice. Janet silently pushed a thick stack of documents toward Ashley and spoke in a firm voice, barely concealing her anger. "Ashley, this is the official decision from the board. Your employment is terminated immediately." Ashley trembled, her voice weak as she pleaded, "Janet, please, let me explain. I really didn't know who that woman was." Janet shook her head, her tone full of disappointment. "It's not that you didn't know, it's that you didn't care to know. Brightwell will not tolerate actions like this. But what's more serious is that Jessica Carter has now officially filed a lawsuit against you for racial discrimination and defamation." Ashley's face went pale, her eyes wide with panic. "She's suing me, personally?" Janet looked at her sternly. "Yes, this is no longer Brightwell's issue. Miss Carter is determined to pursue this lawsuit to the end. Her lawyers have already sent us the official notice." Ashley felt the world crash down around her. Just this morning, she had been the confident receptionist at Brightwell, and now her life and career were in ruins because of one thoughtless moment, one arrogant attitude that she had always considered normal. In another corner of the company, Mark Reynolds watched the unfolding events with his usual calm and chilling detachment. However, as he looked at the phone screen displaying the drop in stock prices, he couldn't help but feel a bit uneasy. The crisis he had intentionally set in motion to overthrow Richard Lawson was now spiraling beyond his control. Mark's phone buzzed with an incoming call. James Harper, CEO of Nexus Tech, Brightwell's biggest competitor. Mark took a deep breath before answering, his voice trying to remain steady. "James, I'm listening." "Mark, your plan has gone a bit too far. If Brightwell collapses completely, it'll be hard for us to capitalize on the advantage," James warned cautiously. Mark clenched his hand, his voice tinged with a bit of tension but still maintaining his cold demeanor. "James, this is just the initial reaction. I guarantee Richard Lawson will have to step down as CEO, and when that happens, Brightwell will be ours." James chuckled lightly through the phone, his voice still skeptical but accepting. "I hope you're right, Mark. If this turns into a disaster, I won't let myself get involved." After ending the call, Mark looked out the window, a flicker of concern crossing his face. He had made a high-stakes gamble in this power play, but it was Ashley Monroe's arrogance and carelessness that had unwittingly pushed his plan into dangerous, unpredictable territory. In the CEO's office, Richard Lawson sat stunned in his chair. His phone screen lit up constantly with calls from investors, partners, and even the biggest news agencies. He didn't know how to respond, realizing that he, too, was responsible for the toxic culture and serious mistake that had occurred at Brightwell. "Mr. Lawson, I think you should take a look at this." A nervous assistant placed a tablet in front of him. Richard looked at the screen, his face growing even paler. A headline appeared. "Jessica Carter declares Carter Tech will no longer partner with any business that tolerates discrimination and racism." He closed his eyes, taking a deep, despairing breath. Richard knew this wasn't just a financial issue. It had exposed the weak foundation of Brightwell's culture and business ethics, things he had ignored for far too long. In a small office on the lower floor, Vanessa Lewis quietly watched the news with a heavy heart. Though she felt some satisfaction as justice began to be served, she understood that these were only the initial damages, and the real culprits, like Mark Reynolds, were still hiding in the shadows. Vanessa closed her eyes, silently hoping that Jessica Carter wouldn't stop here. Only a massive earthquake could completely destroy the toxic culture that had long existed within Brightwell Enterprises. And she knew Jessica Carter was strong and decisive enough to see it through. But whether Brightwell would survive the coming storm, or whether it would collapse completely, Vanessa couldn't say for certain. While Richard Lawson was still trying to manage the fallout from the serious incident caused by Ashley Monroe, he was unaware that another, much greater danger was silently brewing within the walls of Brightwell, just waiting for the right moment to explode. The following morning, as Richard stepped into his office, his senior assistant, Sarah Mitchell, hurried over to him, her face tense with anxiety. "Mr. Lawson, you need to see this immediately," Sarah said quietly, handing him a tablet, her eyes filled with concern. Richard took the tablet and opened it, immediately feeling as though he had been punched in the chest. On the screen were a series of secret emails exchanged between Mark Reynolds, Brightwell's executive vice president, and James Harper, CEO of Nexus Tech, a direct competitor of Brightwell Enterprises. "Where did this email come from?" Richard asked in a trembling voice, struggling to contain his rising fury. Sarah lowered her voice, her expression grave. The internal security department detected anomalies in Mr. Reynolds's personal email system. He's been using a personal email to communicate with James Harper for months. The more Richard read, the darker his face became. The contents of the emails were thorough and detailed. Mark had secretly shared highly confidential business strategies, technological information, and even internal plans of Brightwell with Nexus Tech in exchange for personal promises of future high-level leadership positions. Without another word, Richard slammed the tablet down onto the desk and quickly marched toward Mark Reynolds' office. Not bothering to knock, he stormed straight in. Mark Reynolds was startled, but he quickly regained his composure, feigning surprise. "Richard, what's going on?" Richard glared at him with burning anger, his voice low and menacing. "Mark, are you still pretending? I've read every single one of your emails with Nexus Tech. Are you planning to sell out Brightwell to our competitor?" Mark's face momentarily flickered, but he quickly regained his calm, offering a slight smile. "Richard, I think you've misunderstood. Those were just casual exchanges, nothing serious." "Casual?" Richard shouted, his voice full of rage. "You handed over all of our product information, business plans, and marketing strategies to Nexus Tech, and you dare call that casual?" Mark stood up, still maintaining his calm demeanor, but his voice now carried a chilling challenge. "Richard, don't make a big deal out of this. Those emails don't prove anything." Richard clenched his fists, struggling to keep his composure in front of the audacity of the colleague he had once trusted. "Mark, I was wrong to trust you all these years. You haven't just betrayed me. You've betrayed Brightwell, pushing us into an even deeper crisis. If Carter Tech hadn't pulled out because of Ashley's incident, they would have pulled out because of the secrets you've given to Nexus." Mark shrugged, showing no sign of remorse. "Richard, this is business. If you can't handle that truth, then you're no longer fit to be CEO." Richard took a deep breath. His eyes filled with both disappointment and anger. "You will be held accountable by the board of directors and the law for this act of treason and fraud." Just then, a voice echoed from the door. "You're right, Richard. I think the board needs to know about this." Both Richard and Mark turned to see Elizabeth Hamilton, the chairwoman of the board, standing in the doorway, her face stern and icy. Elizabeth entered the room, locking her sharp gaze onto Mark Reynolds. "I've read those emails, Mark. Your actions are not just an internal betrayal, but could also constitute industrial espionage. The board will convene immediately to make a decision, and I will be forwarding this file to the legal authorities." Mark's face changed color for the first time. His eyes now betrayed a visible fear. He hadn't expected the issue to be discovered so quickly and to escalate this seriously. Elizabeth turned to Richard, her voice cold but still tinged with a hint of sympathy. "Richard, I want you to understand that this issue is not just about Mark Reynolds. It has clearly revealed that Brightwell's internal culture and management practices are facing serious problems. You will need to address this in the board meeting." Richard nodded, a sense of helplessness rising in him. He knew better than anyone that Mark Reynolds' collusion with Nexus Tech wasn't just an isolated incident. It was the clearest indication of the deep-rooted issues within Brightwell, issues that he had unknowingly allowed to persist. On the other side of the hallway, Vanessa Lewis quietly observed the confrontation, her heart filled with tension and anxiety. While she felt some relief that the truth had finally come to light, she understood that this was just the beginning of a much deeper internal crisis. People like Mark Reynolds could be exposed, but Brightwell Enterprises might have to pay a very high price, perhaps even collapse entirely. Vanessa closed her eyes, wondering if Jessica Carter had foreseen this serious consequence when she decided to pull out of the deal. And she understood that Jessica had probably seen it clearly from the moment she walked out of Brightwell's door, in that cold, calm, and powerful silence. Brightwell Enterprises could no longer go back. The internal battle that Mark Reynolds had instigated, along with the fallout from Ashley Monroe's discriminatory actions, had created a crisis storm that they could no longer control. The secret emails exposed were just the beginning of the dark days ahead for Brightwell Enterprises. Mark Reynolds' betrayal quickly became front-page news across media outlets and social networks, stoking a firestorm of crisis that no one could extinguish. In just a few short days, major clients began announcing the termination of their contracts with Brightwell, citing concerns over the company's security and integrity. Brightwell's stock continued to plummet at an unprecedented rate, with the company's value sinking like a ship heading toward the ocean floor. Richard Lawson was nearly exhausted. Every call he received was a notice of contract cancellations or damage compensation demands from clients. The boardroom, once bright and bustling, now felt dim and cold. The final meeting took place in such a heavy atmosphere that no one had the strength to argue anymore. Elizabeth Hamilton, chairwoman of the board, looked directly into Richard's eyes with a cold yet regretful expression. "Richard, we have no other choice. Brightwell Enterprises will have to declare bankruptcy." Richard bowed his head, his hands trembling as his voice became one of helplessness. "I know, Elizabeth. I take full responsibility for this, but I never thought it would escalate to this point." Elizabeth sighed softly, her voice tinged with sympathy. "You trusted the wrong people. But now there's nothing we can do. Prepare the official announcement for the employees and press tomorrow." Meanwhile, Mark Reynolds was facing another storm. A storm he had created but had completely lost control over. That very afternoon, FBI agents and SEC investigators appeared at his private residence, carrying a search warrant and seizing all documents and personal computers for investigation. Mark tried to remain calm, but his voice betrayed his panic. "I don't understand. I thought this was just an internal matter for the company." An FBI agent stared at him sternly, his voice firm. "Mr. Reynolds, disclosing internal information for personal gain is no longer an internal matter. This is industrial espionage and serious financial fraud." As the FBI agents searched his home, Mark sat motionless on the sofa, his lifeless eyes staring into space. All of his ambitions for power, his cold calculations, had now turned against him, transforming him from a man of power into a serious criminal suspect facing the risk of losing everything, even facing prison time. News of the investigation spread quickly, causing a stir in public and financial circles. Nexus Tech, the company that had secretly conspired with Mark, hastily issued a statement denying any involvement and severed all ties with him. James Harper, CEO of Nexus Tech, quickly distanced himself, leaving Mark completely isolated. A few days later, Brightwell Enterprises officially announced its bankruptcy. The company's once vibrant lobby, full of light and confidence, was now a somber and heavy scene. Employees silently packed their belongings, their faces full of confusion and disappointment. Vanessa Lewis stood in a corner, looking around at the faces of former colleagues. While she understood that this collapse was the inevitable result of serious mistakes, seeing this scene still caused her heart to ache. She knew that the people who would be most affected were not the senior leaders like Mark or Richard, but the innocent, ordinary employees. In another corner of the city, Jessica Carter sat in her spacious office, calmly following the news about Brightwell. Laura stood beside her, a hint of concern in her eyes. "Miss Carter, the situation has spread much further than we expected. Brightwell has declared bankruptcy, and Mark Reynolds is under federal investigation. Do you think we've gone too far?" Jessica shook her head gently, her voice calm but resolute. "It's not us, Laura. They've pushed themselves into this position. If not for my involvement, they would have eventually been destroyed by their own unethical actions. I simply didn't let them continue to hide it." Jessica gazed out the window, her deep eyes seeming to look toward a new future. A future where actions of discrimination and fraud would no longer have a place in this industry. At Mark Reynolds' private home, an FBI agent approached him with a serious tone. "Mr. Reynolds, please come with us to the headquarters. We have a few questions to clarify." Mark sluggishly stood up, his eyes filled with confusion and despair. In that moment, he realized the most brutal truth. He had traded everything for the pursuit of power and glory, only to end up with betrayal, isolation, and ultimately complete ruin. At the same time, Richard Lawson sat quietly in his empty office, staring out the glass window at the bustling streets below. Brightwell Enterprises, the company he had spent his life building, was no more. He understood that the internal cultural mistakes, misplaced trust, and disregard for ethical issues were the root causes that led to this day. A major chapter in Richard's life and career had closed, painful and bitter. But perhaps from the ashes, he had learned the most important lesson. True power does not lie in authority or money, but in integrity and ethics. A lesson he had realized too late. When Brightwell Enterprises declared bankruptcy, Ashley Monroe knew that her faint hopes had completely vanished. In just a few short days, Ashley went from being the proud receptionist at a top company to a name that every business sought to avoid. Every job interview ended quickly and coldly. When recruiters saw her name on her resume, the initial smiles would vanish instantly, replaced by looks of scrutiny and discomfort. After just a few meetings, Ashley realized that she had been blacklisted, someone no one would hire due to the racist scandal she had caused. The following days became a never-ending chain of isolation and despair. Friends and former colleagues gradually cut off contact. No one wanted to be associated with the woman who had caused such a massive crisis at Brightwell. Social media was flooded with comments criticizing and even insulting her. The name Ashley Monroe became synonymous with arrogance, racism, and toxicity. But the heaviest blow came on a bleak morning when Ashley received a court summons. The lawsuit from Jessica Carter had officially arrived, demanding Ashley pay $2 million in damages for defamation and racial discrimination. Ashley's heart stopped when she held the letter in her hands. She could not fathom the figure of $2 million, an amount far beyond her ability to pay. In that moment, Ashley knew her life had fallen into the abyss. She collapsed to the cold floor, her hands trembling, tears streaming down her pale face. "It can't be," she whispered desperately, her lifeless eyes fixed on the summons. Everything around her suddenly seemed meaningless. The arrogance and confidence she once had now only left behind despair and an overwhelming sense of fear. In the days that followed, Ashley tried to reach out to friends and family, hoping for help. But all she received was silence or cold rejections. Even Mark Reynolds, who had once used and stood behind her, remained completely silent, leaving her to face this nightmare alone. One gloomy afternoon, Ashley sat in her tiny apartment, her eyes blankly staring out the window, feeling the weight of loneliness and despair closing in on her mind. Her phone rang repeatedly, but she didn't dare to answer, knowing that the calls were from journalists looking to exploit more details about the lawsuit. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, startling Ashley. She hesitated before walking to the door and peeking through the peephole. It was the landlord, with an annoyed expression on his face. "Ashley, I need to talk to you." the landlord said bluntly as the door opened, his eyes cold with no trace of sympathy. Ashley nervously responded, "What's the matter?" "I can't continue renting this apartment to you," he replied curtly, his voice filled with irritation. "The other residents have complained a lot, and they don't want to live near someone like you." Ashley felt as if someone had splashed cold water in her face. Even the only shelter she had left was being taken away. She nodded quietly, too exhausted to resist. "I understand. I will move out in a few days." The landlord didn't say another word, turned, and walked away, leaving Ashley standing motionless in the apartment, which now felt eerily unfamiliar and cold. She sank down onto the sofa, bitter tears flowing uncontrollably. Everything she once had, a proud job, social status, close friends, had vanished in the blink of an eye. Now she had lost her job, her honor, and was facing the threat of bankruptcy and losing everything left. In the midst of her despair, Ashley's phone rang again. This time, it was Jessica Carter's attorney calling. "Ms. Monroe, I'm calling to inform you that if you do not pay the compensation, we will be forced to take further legal action." Ashley's voice trembled, almost pleading. "Please tell Ms. Carter that I really can't afford that amount. Please forgive me. I will do anything to make up for my mistakes." The lawyer replied coldly, his voice devoid of emotion. "I'm sorry, but Ms. Carter's decision is final. You have seriously offended her honor and reputation, and that cannot be easily overlooked." The call ended abruptly, and Ashley buried her face in her hands, crying uncontrollably in despair. Now she truly understood the consequences of the arrogance and prejudice she had shown. From once standing atop the peak with self-satisfaction, Ashley Monroe had now completely fallen into the depths of loneliness and failure, losing everything in a moment of foolishness. From afar, Jessica Carter received reports from her attorney about Ashley's current situation. She quietly looked at the screen, her gaze thoughtful, but without any pity. Jessica understood that what she sought to achieve was not the destruction of an individual, but to make society clearly recognize the severe consequences of contempt and discrimination. The downfall of Ashley Monroe was not just a harsh lesson for Ashley herself, but also a powerful warning to anyone who had ever disregarded ethics and respect for others. A clear message that Jessica was determined to send, at any cost. As Ashley Monroe descended into the depths of despair, Vanessa Lewis was packing the last of her personal belongings in her small office at Brightwell, her heart filled with conflicting emotions. While she had always believed that leaving was the right decision, deep down, she still felt a sense of regret for what Brightwell once was and what it could have become. At that moment, Vanessa's phone rang, breaking the stillness of her contemplation. Seeing an unfamiliar number on the screen, she hesitated before deciding to answer. "Hello, this is Vanessa Lewis," she said cautiously. A warm, confident, and very familiar voice came from the other end of the line, causing Vanessa to pause for a moment. "Hello, Ms. Lewis. This is Jessica Carter." Vanessa took a deep breath, trying to remain calm despite her heart racing. "Hello, Miss Carter. I'm surprised to receive a call from you." Jessica Carter's voice was calm but sincere as she smiled through the phone. "I've known about you since the incident at Brightwell, Vanessa. I also know that you were the one standing on the upper floor that day, wanting to intervene but couldn't. I understand that feeling of helplessness." Vanessa shuddered slightly as the memory of that day flooded back. She responded emotionally, "I truly regret that I couldn't do more to prevent that incident. I want you to know how ashamed I am to have witnessed that." "I know, Vanessa," Jessica replied sympathetically, her voice softening. But what matters most to me right now isn't the past, it's the future. I've done my research on you, particularly your outstanding contributions in cybersecurity and AI at Brightwell." Vanessa paused for a moment, surprised that someone as powerful and successful as Jessica Carter would be deeply interested in the work she had done, work that had always been overlooked and undervalued at Brightwell. "I'm very touched to hear you say that." Jessica continued with determination and clarity. "Vanessa, I'd like to invite you to join Carter Tech. We are currently launching a major project in cybersecurity based on artificial intelligence, worth billions of dollars. I believe that with your expertise and dedication, you could play a pivotal role in this project." Vanessa could hardly believe what she had just heard. This was not just a job offer. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that she had never dared to dream of. Vanessa took a deep breath, trying to steady her voice. "Ms. Carter, I truly don't know how to respond. This is such an incredible honor for me." Jessica smiled gently, her voice filled with encouragement and sincerity. "You absolutely deserve it. I've seen far too many talented people like you passed over simply because of bias or the conservatism within toxic corporate environments. I want Carter Tech to be a place where that changes, and I believe you'll help us achieve that." Vanessa felt hope and determination reignite within her. She knew that this wasn't just a new opportunity for her career, but a significant step toward building a healthier corporate culture, one where talent is recognized fairly, no longer suffocated by toxic biases. "I accept, Ms. Carter. I'm deeply grateful for the opportunity you've given me," Vanessa responded confidently, with determination. Jessica's response was satisfying, gentle yet firm. "Good, Vanessa. Welcome to Carter Tech. We'll send you all the details and work plans as soon as possible." The call ended, and Vanessa stood silently in the familiar small room, but now she felt completely different. Her heart was filled with faith and hope for a new future, one where her talent and integrity would finally be acknowledged and respected. On her first day at Carter Tech, Vanessa walked into the spacious office where top experts in the field of technology were diligently working. Jessica Carter personally greeted her, her eyes full of trust and respect. "Vanessa, you'll be in charge of the entire AI-based cybersecurity development division. This is a key project for us, and I have complete confidence in your abilities." Vanessa smiled faintly and nodded assuredly. "You can trust me, Ms. Carter. I'll do my best to ensure the success of this project." Jessica gently placed her hand on Vanessa's shoulder, her gaze deep and sincere. "I know. And Vanessa, remember, at Carter Tech, you won't have to witness injustice in silence anymore. Here, you are empowered to change everything." Vanessa felt a surge of emotion in her chest. She understood that her rise was not just a personal career milestone, but also the beginning of a deeper change in the tech industry, an industry that had long been plagued by injustice and hidden biases. The door to Carter Tech's office closed behind her, but at the same time, a new chapter in Vanessa's life officially began. A chapter where she was no longer a passive observer, but a decisive force contributing to changing a corporate culture that had hurt so many talented individuals. Vanessa Lewis, once the forgotten manager at Brightwell, was now officially the rising star at Carter Tech, ready to lead a billion-dollar project, stepping out of the shadow of bias and shining with her own talent and integrity. At Carter Tech, Vanessa Lewis quickly proved her abilities, becoming a key player in the successful AI cybersecurity project worth billions of dollars. But Jessica Carter had a much bigger plan, one that went far beyond the limits of a mere business project. A plan that Vanessa didn't know about until one surprising morning. After finishing an important meeting, Vanessa was surprised to see Jessica walk into her office with a gentle smile, one that hid many deeper meanings. Vanessa, I have a big surprise for you, Jessica began with enthusiasm in her voice. Vanessa looked up, curious. What is it, Miss Carter? Jessica gently placed a detailed blueprint on Vanessa's desk, with the prominent title, Carter Center for Innovation. But what truly stunned Vanessa was the location written on the map. It was the former headquarters of Brightwell Enterprises. Vanessa stared at Jessica, her voice trembling with emotion. You bought the entire Brightwell building? Jessica nodded softly, her gaze filled with determination. Yes. I want it to become a new symbol. A place that once represented injustice and prejudice will now be reborn to promote social justice, support minority communities, and build a culture of innovation in the tech industry. Vanessa couldn't hide her emotions as she looked at the plan in front of her. The painful memories of her time at Brightwell flooded back, but this time there was a completely different feeling, a sense of hope and a longing for change. This is truly a brilliant idea. I believe it will change the lives of so many people. Jessica placed her hand gently on Vanessa's shoulder, her eyes full of trust and sincerity. Vanessa, I want you to be the CEO of this center. No one is more suited than you to lead it. Carter Center for Innovation will not only drive technology, but it will also be a place to inspire and foster true fairness. Vanessa was speechless for a few seconds, unable to process what she had just heard. She had never imagined that her dream would be realized so clearly. Finally, she nodded with resolve. I accept, Miss Carter. I promise to do everything in my power to make this center a symbol of innovation and social justice. Soon, the news of Carter Center for Innovation spread quickly, becoming hot news that attracted widespread attention. A major project would rise from the very place that once symbolized discrimination and crisis, now becoming a new symbol for change and progress. On the day of the groundbreaking ceremony, Vanessa stood alongside Jessica in front of the entire community, delivering a deeply emotional speech. Today marks the rebirth from the ashes of the past. A place that once symbolized discrimination and injustice will now become a space for creativity, where everyone, regardless of race, gender, or background, will have an equal opportunity to showcase their talent and build the future. The crowd erupted in thunderous applause, filled with hope. Admiring and grateful eyes turned toward Vanessa, strengthening her determination in her mission. In a distant corner, Ashley Monroe accidentally walked by, her empty gaze fixed on the building under construction. She felt her heart tighten as she watched the powerful rebirth of the very place where she had once worked, now becoming a symbol for the values she had once despised. She understood clearly this was the consequence of the very biases she had nurtured. At the same time, in a small room of a federal prison, Mark Reynolds quietly watched the news on a small screen. The images of Jessica Carter and Vanessa Lewis standing together, smiling brightly in front of the new project, made him bitterly realize that the dark schemes he had set in motion had unintentionally paved the way for the rise of the people he had once looked down upon and exploited. Richard Lawson, who had once been the head of Brightwell Enterprises, now lived quietly in a small town in the countryside. Watching Carter Center for Innovation rise from the place where he had once held power, his heart filled with bitterness and regret. But at the same time, he understood that this was the inevitable consequence of the mistakes he had made. At Carter Center for Innovation, Vanessa began the first steps of her new journey, focusing on building training programs and supporting startups for minority communities. She personally met, listened to, and inspired thousands of young people who had never been given equal opportunities before. Jessica Carter looked at the project growing every day, her heart filled with pride and hope. Carter Center for Innovation was not just a form of revenge or proof of her own power, But more importantly, it represented the victory of rightful values over injustice and prejudice. From a place once forgotten and despised, Vanessa Lewis had now officially become the leader of a center that symbolized innovation and fairness. The rebirth of Brightwell into Carter Center for Innovation was not only a turning point in Vanessa's life, but also a powerful message to society. When discrimination and injustice are dismantled, talent and integrity will always be recognized and shine brightly. A year quickly passed since the groundbreaking of the Carter Center for Innovation, and the day Brightwell Enterprises officially became a name of the past. After a series of scandals and deep crises, the once powerful company had now become nothing more than fragmented memories on the harsh business landscape. At the same time, in a quiet rural town in Colorado, Richard Lawson lived a reclusive life in a small wooden house, completely disconnected from the glamorous business world he had once belonged to. Every morning, he sat on the porch, sipping a bitter cup of coffee, silently gazing at the distant mountains. The memories of his peak days at Brightwell still haunted him, replaying in his mind like a persistent nightmare. Richard had once tried to return to the business world, but his past mistakes had ruined his reputation beyond repair. No one wanted to work with a person who had allowed a toxic culture and discrimination to thrive within his own company. Ultimately, he had to accept that he no longer had a place in the world he once dominated. On cold afternoons, Richard would often wander down the small road near his home, his distant gaze fixed on the snow-covered mountains. He painfully realized that he hadn't just lost his company and wealth, but also the respect of all those who had once trusted him. The price he had to pay for his neglect and past mistakes was far too high, and Richard understood that this was the harshest punishment of all. Elsewhere, hundreds of miles to the south, Mark Reynolds had just finished serving his prison sentence at a federal facility in Arizona. He returned to life outside with an empty, solitary heart. His wife had divorced him. Friends and former partners avoided him, treating him like a stranger, a despicable traitor. Mark rented a small apartment in a deserted suburb, living off the meager savings he had left. Every day, he faced the scrutinizing glances of neighbors who knew exactly who he had been and what he had done. Long, empty days passed as he sat in front of an old TV, watching news reports about the rapid growth of Carter Tech and the success of Carter Center for Innovation, the very place he had once despised and tried to destroy. Every time he saw Vanessa Lewis on television, now the director of the center, he bitterly realized that he had underestimated her, an error that cost him his career and life. Vanessa's and Jessica Carter's success was a painful reminder that all his dark schemes, selfishness and greed had utterly failed. One late afternoon, as the sunset slowly faded over the vast desert, Mark wandered alone down a quiet road. His eyes were lifeless, his steps weary. He stopped in front of a small store and saw his reflection in the old glass. An old, gaunt man with no trace of the powerful figure he once was. "What have I done with my life?" he whispered, his voice full of despair. He knew deep down that this was the inevitable end of a life filled with ambition, but lacking in ethics. Now, he had nothing left but loneliness and late regret. Meanwhile, at Carter Center for Innovation, life was a stark contrast to the bleak surroundings of those who had once caused the crisis. Vanessa Lewis continued to shine with clear accomplishments. Not only had she succeeded in training and supporting thousands of young people from minority communities, but she had also created an equitable, creative, and diverse work environment that had never been seen before in the tech industry. Jessica Carter frequently appeared alongside Vanessa, supporting and encouraging her in every major and minor initiative. Carter Center for Innovation had now become a model of innovation and social justice in the global tech industry. This success was the clearest evidence that good values and integrity had the power to overcome all dark, selfish schemes. One weekend afternoon, Jessica and Vanessa stood on the rooftop of the center, looking down at the lively scene below. Hundreds of young people working together, creating, exchanging ideas, their faces filled with confidence and hope. Jessica smiled softly, her eyes full of gratitude as she looked at Vanessa. "Vanessa, I think we've truly done something meaningful. This place not only represents a rebirth from the mistakes of the past, but it's also a powerful affirmation that the future belongs to those who live and work with sincere hearts." Vanessa responded with a radiant smile, her heart full of pride and happiness. "I know this wasn't easy, but thanks to your decisiveness and trust, Jessica, we're standing here today. Carter Center for Innovation is not just a tech center. It's a beacon of hope and fairness." The two women stood in silence for a moment, silently admiring the beautiful view below. They knew that they hadn't just won in business, but more importantly, they had triumphed in the struggle for integrity, fairness, and humanity, a victory with real meaning and eternal value. While Vanessa and Jessica enjoyed their success and happiness at the Carter Center for Innovation, in another corner of the city, Ashley Monroe continued to live in the persistent shadow of the past she had created. Ashley now only had long, endless night shifts at a small customer service center tucked away in a quiet, less frequented neighborhood. Every night, she sat before an old computer screen, silently listening to the complaints and disdainful remarks from customers. "Is this even considered service? Do you even know how to work? Why should I talk to someone as unprofessional as you?" These insulting and dismissive words echoed each night, piercing Ashley's ears painfully. She realized that this was the very feeling Jessica Carter had once endured, the feeling of being belittled, rejected, and denied, something she had once done to others ruthlessly and thoughtlessly. When her shift ended, Ashley dragged herself out of the service center, her body exhausted, her mind empty. She often avoided the eyes of her colleagues, knowing full well they looked at her with a mixture of scorn and pity. One young colleague inadvertently spoke loudly in the break room when she walked by. Who would have thought she used to work at Brightwell? What a karmic downfall. Ashley didn't respond, simply lowering her head and walking quickly, as if trying to escape from herself. She continued applying for jobs at other companies, holding on to the faint hope that one day she would escape this dull, exhausting work. But every interview ended with scrutinizing glances, doubt, and ultimately, cold rejections. "We're sorry, but we cannot hire someone with your background." Ashley understood the real reason behind these rejections. The racial discrimination scandal had destroyed her honor and reputation completely. Now, the name Ashley Monroe was a permanent stain on her job applications. Each night as she returned to her small apartment, she would stare at the rejection emails and the harsh comments that continued to flood social media, as if the world was constantly reminding her of her mistakes. There were moments when she cried alone in the dark room, unheard and unseen. It was in these moments that she fully understood the consequences of her arrogance and prejudice. The price was far greater than anything she had ever imagined. One evening, Ashley accidentally saw the news about the Carter Center for Innovation on the small TV screen at the corner of a cafe. The image of Jessica Carter and Vanessa Lewis joyfully speaking with young people about opportunities in the future in tech hit her hard. Seeing their remarkable success, she felt a rush of shame and bitterness fill her heart. "Why did I act like that back then?" she muttered to herself, tears streaming down her face. "If I hadn't been so foolish and dismissed Jessica, maybe my life wouldn't have ended up like this." Ashley knew that it was too late to change anything. The past couldn't be undone, and the honor she had lost could never be reclaimed. All she could do was move on, endure, and accept the consequences of her own actions. Day by day, Ashley sank deeper into isolation. Old friends, those who had stood by her when she was at Brightwell, now avoided her. No one wanted to be associated with the woman who had a reputation for racial prejudice. She was so alone that sometimes she wondered how much longer she could survive this life. But one day, in the depths of her despair, Ashley received a call from Jessica Carter's attorney. At first, she panicked, her heart racing, fearing it was another lawsuit or demand for compensation. But the lawyer's voice was unexpectedly calm and serious. "Ms. Carter has asked me to inform you that the $2 million compensation will now be converted into community service at an organization supporting minority communities. This is your final opportunity to make amends with the community." Ashley trembled, a mix of relief and embarrassment washing over her. She understood that this wasn't just Jessica's generosity. It was her last chance to start over and repair the mistakes of the past. "Please convey my deep thanks to Ms. Carter. I accept," Ashley replied, her voice shaking with emotion. In the days that followed, Ashley began working at a small community center, where she helped and advised people who had faced the same kind of prejudice she had caused. Slowly, she began to understand the pain and loss that those who had been discriminated against had to endure. Though the road ahead was still full of challenges, for the first time in a long while, Ashley felt a sense of relief in her heart. She knew that she could never reclaim what she had lost, but at least now she had a chance to live differently and make up for some of the wrongs she had done. In that moment, Ashley realized that her life had completely turned around. From a once arrogant, powerful figure, she had become someone who truly understood the pain of isolation and prejudice. It was a harsh but valuable lesson, one she would carry with her for the rest of her life. As Vanessa and Jessica enjoyed their success and happiness at the Carter Center for Innovation, on the other side of the city, Ashley Monroe continued to live in the persistent shadow of the past she had created. Ashley now only had long, endless night shifts at a small customer service center located deep in a less traveled neighborhood. Every night she sat before an old computer screen, silently listening to the complaints and disdainful remarks from customers. Is this really considered service? Do you even know how to work? Why should I talk to such an unprofessional employee like you? These insults and dismissive words echoed every night, piercing Ashley's ears with pain. She realized that this was the very feeling Jessica Carter had once endured. The feeling of being belittled, rejected, and denied, which she herself had once inflicted on others with cruelty and thoughtlessness. When her shift ended, Ashley dragged herself out of the service center, her body exhausted and her mind empty. She often avoided her colleagues' eyes, knowing full well they looked at her with scorn and pity. One young colleague inadvertently spoke loudly in the break room when she walked by. Who would have thought she used to work at Brightwell? What a karmic downfall. Ashley didn't respond, simply lowering her head and walking quickly, as if trying to escape from herself. She continued applying for jobs at other companies, holding on to the faint hope that one day she would escape this dull, exhausting job. But every interview ended with scrutinizing looks, doubt, and ultimately cold rejections. "We're sorry, but we cannot hire someone with your background." Ashley understood the real reason behind these rejections. The racial discrimination scandal had destroyed her honor and reputation completely. Now, the name Ashley Monroe was a permanent stain on her job applications. Each night as she returned to her small apartment, she would stare at the rejection emails and the harsh comments that continued to flood social media, as if the world was constantly reminding her of her mistakes. There were moments when she cried alone in the dark room, unheard and unseen. It was in these moments that she fully understood the consequences of her arrogance and prejudice. The price was far greater than anything she had ever imagined. One evening, Ashley accidentally saw the news about the Carter Center for Innovation on the small TV screen at the corner of a cafe. The image of Jessica Carter and Vanessa Lewis joyfully speaking with young people about opportunities and the future in tech hit her hard. Seeing their remarkable success, she felt a rush of shame and bitterness fill her heart. "Why did I act like that back then?" she muttered to herself, tears streaming down her face. "If I hadn't been so foolish and dismissed Jessica, maybe my life wouldn't have ended up like this." Ashley knew that it was too late to change anything. The past couldn't be undone, and the honor she had lost could never be reclaimed. All she could do was move on, endure, and accept the consequences of her own actions. Day by day, Ashley sank deeper into isolation. Old friends, those who had stood by her when she was at Brightwell, now avoided her. No one wanted to be associated with the woman who had a reputation for racial prejudice. She was so alone that sometimes she wondered how much longer she could survive this life. But one day, in the depths of her despair, Ashley received a call from Jessica Carter's attorney. At first, she panicked, her heart racing, fearing it was another lawsuit or demand for compensation. But the lawyer's voice was unexpectedly calm and serious. "Ms. Carter has asked me to inform you that the $2 million compensation will now be converted into community service at an organization supporting minority communities. This is your final opportunity to make amends with the community." Ashley trembled, a mix of relief and embarrassment washing over her. She understood that this wasn't just Jessica's generosity. It was her last chance to start over and repair the mistakes of the past. "Please convey my deep thanks to Ms. Carter." "I accept," Ashley replied, her voice shaking with emotion. In the days that followed, Ashley began working at a small community center, where she helped and advised people who had faced the same kind of prejudice she had caused. Slowly, she began to understand the pain and loss that those who had been discriminated against had to endure. Though the road ahead was still full of challenges, for the first time in a long while, Ashley felt a sense of relief in her heart. She knew that she could never reclaim what she had lost, but at least now she had a chance to live differently and make up for some of the wrong she had done. In that moment, Ashley realized that her life had completely turned around. From a once arrogant, powerful figure, she had become someone who truly understood the pain of isolation and prejudice. It was a harsh but valuable lesson, one she would carry with her for the rest of her life. Meanwhile, at Carter Center for Innovation, Vanessa continued to shine with clear accomplishments. Under her leadership, with Jessica's full support, the center became a beacon for innovation and social equity in the tech industry, offering equal opportunities to marginalized communities. Through training programs and creative initiatives, Vanessa empowered thousands of young people, helping them realize their dreams and break barriers. Jessica Carter, with her success at Carter Tech and the growth of the Carter Center for Innovation, became a symbol of social change and progress. She didn't just lead a thriving tech company, but also advocated for racial equality policies that had an impact at the federal level. Her efforts were not only shaping the future of the industry, but also contributing to a broader movement for social justice. On a visit to the U.S. Congress, Jessica spoke passionately. "We cannot change the past, but we can absolutely create a better future, one where every young person, regardless of race or background, has the opportunity to pursue and achieve their dreams." Her words resonated deeply, gaining widespread support from the public and policymakers alike. Thanks to Jessica's influence and vision, key legislation for equal opportunities in tech education and investment in minority communities was passed, bringing about profound and lasting change. Standing on the rooftop of Carter Center for Innovation one evening, Jessica gazed out over the vast cityscape. She could see the old Brightwell Enterprises building, now transformed into a symbol of rebirth and growth, sending a powerful message about the human and societal capacity for change. Vanessa walked up beside her, smiling gently. "Jessica, you've turned what seemed impossible into reality. You've rebuilt not just from the ashes of Brightwell, but from the prejudices that hurt so many people." Jessica nodded thoughtfully, her gaze deep. "Vanessa, I realize now that true power isn't about personal revenge or defeating rivals. True power is about turning pain and hurt into motivation to build something meaningful and lasting." Vanessa remained silent for a moment before responding with gratitude and sincerity in her eyes. "I believe everything we've done will continue to spread. The young people we've helped today will become the leaders of tomorrow, continuing to make a difference." Jessica smiled, filled with hope as she looked toward the future. She knew that this was the greatest victory over prejudice and hatred, powered by humanity and compassion. In another corner, Ashley Monroe continued to work at the community center. She was no longer the arrogant, prejudiced woman she once was. Instead, she was slowly working every day to heal the wounds she had caused. And for the first time in a long time, she felt she was truly starting over. Although the road ahead was still full of challenges, it was now more meaningful and worth living. Mark Reynolds continued his lonely life in Arizona. Richard Lawson remained hidden in Colorado, but their stories had faded into the past, leaving behind a profound lesson about the value of integrity and humanity in business. On the rooftop, Jessica looked toward the horizon, her gaze strong and clear. She knew that the greatest legacy she would leave behind was not wealth or personal fame, but the change in mindset and culture, the opportunities that Carter Center for Innovation was providing to thousands of young people, giving them the confidence to step into the future. "Everything can change," Jessica whispered almost to herself. "We are not limited by the past, by prejudice, or by injustice. We always have the power to choose to do things differently, to build a better world." Below, the city continued to move, but now it carried a new message, a message of rebirth, overcoming mistakes, and heading toward a fairer, more humane future. Jessica Carter knew that, although she had once walked into Brightwell with the goal of evaluating corporate culture, it was that fateful meeting that had given her a much greater mission, the mission to turn pain into strength, using that strength to change the world. Her story, Vanessa's story, and the stories of those who had once made mistakes, like Ashley, Mark, and Richard, all converged on one common lesson. Prejudice and injustice can destroy everything, but compassion, integrity, and the desire for change will always bring life and hope to the future. Jessica smiled softly, at peace and content in her heart. She knew that her legacy would continue to spread powerfully long after this story had ended. Jessica Carter's story wasn't just a valuable lesson about the consequences of prejudice and racism, but also a powerful testament to the strength of compassion and the ability to regenerate from past wounds. From that fateful meeting at Brightwell Enterprises, Jessica built a great legacy, not just for herself, but for the community and society. What about you? If you were in Jessica's shoes, would you choose revenge or use that power to build something better? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel to follow more meaningful and engaging stories. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next video.